Another important responsibility of supply chain managers is to evaluate risk in supply chains. Supply chain disruptions are very common and they can arise from a number of reasons. There can be natural disasters. For example, there could be a pandemic, could be tsunami, could be earthquake, could be any other reason. And all these affect supply chains, which means they would affect your business. So supply chain managers need to develop a risk management plan. And then quality issues, which again is a critical issue. It is a critical issue because the quality of the parts provided by suppliers, they will be incorporated into your product and you will be liable for any bad product. Although some components, they may not be yours, they might have come from a supplier, but you would be liable. And loss of control of sensitive information. If suppliers divulge sensitive information to competitors, it can weaken a firm's competitive position. Then there are some supply chain management related ethical issues. One of the ethical issue is that these supply chains, they can be used for illegal activities. Now, let me give you an example. I'm sure you might have watched that television drama serial Breaking Bad. In that drama, when people will watch that drama, they will watch it from different perspective. A student of operations, production and operation management and supply chain management would watch this drama from the perspective of supply chain. In that drama, there is one character, Gus Fring, the guy who is in chicken business, but he was not really selling chicken was only a cover for his illegal activities. Indeed, he was running supply chain for meth and Walter White was his cook. Supply chains are very much prone to be used illegally. California has made a law. All those firms that are operating in California and their annual global receipts are more than $1 billion, they need to display on their website that their supply chains are not being used for human trafficking and other illegal activities. So it means that all those supply chain managers, they need to evaluate what are the risks in their case. If they are operating in a state that borders with another country where there are possibilities of human trafficking or drugs related activity, it means they need to be mindful of this danger. Then another thing is bribing government or company officials to secure permit of favorable status. Now in some other countries, if you want to expedite clearance at ports or other supply chain related issues, local managers, they will bribe government officials, but that would be illegal in the US. Then exporting smokestacks to developing country, which mean washing your laundry, dirty laundry in developing countries, which mean exporting all dirty operations to developing countries. Sometimes supply chain managers think that we have exported or we have transferred these dirty operations that produce greenhouse gases, that produce smoke and produce wastewater. So problem is resolved, but actually problem is not resolved. Problem is just shifted to another part of the world. It doesn't matter if you are on the north of the globe or you are living in the south of the globe. If there are greenhouse gases, they will affect ozone layer and ozone layer will be depleted and that will affect everybody, no matter you are living. Claiming a green supply chain when the level of green is only minimal. So this is something that's called as greenwashing, which means they would create a false impression that their products and processes are green, while actually it's just minimum, ignoring health, safety, and environmental standard. And this is actually one of the reasons why many companies, they decide to move to developing countries, is that because these developing countries, they have standards for health, safety, and environment are very lenient, violating basic worker right. And that is another reason. For example, that Foxconn, the company that makes Apple phone, they have installed nets around the building. So the nets have been installed because sometimes people try to jump from windows to do suicide because they are working under pressure, and mislabeling the country of origin and selling products abroad that are banned at home, these are unethical issues, of course. And then dealing with ethical issues is that you develop an ethical supply chain code of conduct that tells clearly that what type of activities are allowed and what will not be tolerated. And then monitoring supply chain activities and choosing suppliers that have a reputation for good ethical behavior. Now imagine most of companies, they have, especially large companies, they may have more than 100,000 suppliers. So how do you make these decisions? So which mean that you need to develop some heuristics. So one of the heuristics is that you do business only with those suppliers who have good reputation, so that the other transaction cost of auditing are reduced to some extent and risk is mitigated. Because remember, if a supplier does something wrong and that is your supplier, you are liable. Incorporate compliance with labor standards in supplier contracts. IKEA, IKEA is a Swedish company that sells furniture, and one of their unique selling proposition is that their furniture products are relatively cheap, but they are very simple. They are not very much sophisticated, but that's very simple products, and they are very economic. They are mostly meant for students who are moving to another state or who are living in hostels and they are renting a room and they might need a single bed and some chairs and table, etc. The business model of IKEA, as you can see, is inherently unsustainable because how is furniture made? Furniture is made from wood, and where does wood come from? Wood and timber comes from cutting trees. Now, unless you have a sustainable source where you can make sure that your supply of timber is sustainable, this model may not work in the long run. So in any case, making sure that your resources, your processes are sustainable and they don't have an impact, and incorporating all these things in suppliers contract, that's one duty of supply chain managers. And the next thing is procurement. The procurement is the department, it's a purchasing department that's responsible for obtaining the materials, parts, and supplies and services needed to produce a product or provide a service. Many times, the quality of a product depends upon the quality of parts or raw material received from the supplier. For example, I will give you an example. When we talk about Toyota or Honda, we know they are car assembling company, they assemble cars, but one of the critical component in making a car is steel that makes up the frame of the car, chassis of the car. Now, if that framework is faulty or if there are some micro fractures in the steel, there can be a serious problem because sometimes car undergoes serious accidents whereby cars flip or roll, or sometimes they are just compressed. Now, the only thing that will protect you in a car accident is the strength of steel. But if steel has microfracture or it's of poor quality, then it means your safety is compromised. Now, it is the responsibility of these car assemblers like Toyota, Honda, and other company to make sure that the steel they are receiving from their suppliers is of good quality. These components, they actually cost a lot, and many times you have to negotiate with suppliers. If you can negotiate to reduce cost a little bit, it can make a big difference to your revenues. Let me explain it with an example here. Let's say, for example, there is a company, its revenues are $1 million. This is the cost, which means the cost of material is 500,000, direct labor cost is 200,000, and factory overhead is 200,000, which means the total cost is 500 plus 200,000 plus again 200,000 is 900,000. So the cost is 900,000 and the revenues is 1 million. So which means their gross profit is 1 million minus 900,000 is 100,000. That is their profit. Now let's say, imagine a scenario, and the scenario is that you are going to reduce this material cost that's coming from the supplier by 5%, which means you negotiate with them and reduce this cost by 5%. Now, many people, they would believe that if you reduce this by 5%, then your profit would increase by 5%. But actually, that is not the case. If you reduce this cost, that's material cost, that is the cost you are incurring to suppliers for procuring material, if you reduce this by 5%, your gross profit will increase by 25%. Now, for example, let's say, what will be 5% of this one? 25,000. A reduction, a discount of 25,000 here will give you this direct material cost of 475,000. So then this cost will become 475,000 minus 5%, that's equal to 25,000, and 500,000 minus 25,000 will give you 475,000. 875,000 with this one. And in this case, and the gross profit will be, let's say, if we say 1 million minus 875,000 is equal to 125,000. So your gross profit will become 125,000. Again, calculate how much is the increase from 100,000 to 125,000. That is an increase of 25%. So this is the importance of procurement, which means make even a small change here, then your profit will increase significantly. A reduction of only 5% here is gonna increase profit by 25,000. Similarly, here is another example, and you can see here that if you reduce this material cost by 12%, so for example, let's say in this case, which means we had 500,000. Now, instead of reducing it by 5,000, let's reduce by 12%, and in that case the reduction will be 60,000, and your total cost of will become 440,000. Now, when these costs, which mean material cost, direct cost, and labor cost, they add up together, then they will give you this 840,000, this one. And when we calculate our gross profit, which means 1 million minus 840,000, that will give us a gross profit of 160,000. Now, what was the profit earlier? The profit here earlier was 100,000. And how much is the profit here? Here profit is 160,000, and that is an increase of 60% plus 60% increase. As we have seen that if you reduce it by 5%, that's gonna increase by 25% in that case, and if you decrease this one by 12%, that's gonna increase your profit by 60%. This is the importance of procurement, that why you should negotiate. Now, duties of purchasing include identifying sources of supply, and again remember, as I gave you example, Walmart has more than 100,000 supplier, Boeing has more than 100,000 supplier, Total has more than 75,000 supplier, Procter & Gamble has more than 90,000 suppliers, Volkswagen has more than 75,000 suppliers. Then when you have that large supplier base, then you need to have a good system whereby, for instance, you develop databases for supplier, because of course you cannot have a manual system of several 100,000 suppliers obtaining goods and services and managing suppliers, negotiating contract. We just discussed that how important it is. Some other elements is that supplier audits. Now, because as I mentioned that supplier is a critical element of supply chain, they will affect your product. So you need to conduct their audit. And some of the considerations in this audit are, who is gonna pay for the audit? Now, I want you to pause this video for a minute and tell me, for example, let's say you are a supplier of Walmart, which means you make a product let's say some food product and you sell it to Walmart, and then Walmart, in order to minimize risk, wants to conduct audit. So who is gonna pay for the audit? Is it you who is going to pay for the audit, or Walmart should pay for the audit? Pause it for a moment and tell me what's your answer. Well, there can be different combinations. For example, one thing is that supplier pays, another situation, and let me clarify here. These audits are expensive. For example, who will be conducting audit will be conducting, let's say, some auditing companies like KPMG, PricewaterhouseCoopers, and Deloitte, and these type of companies, and these audits may be expensive. Small supplier cannot afford that. So there can be different arrangements as you negotiate with them. So for example, if a supplier is a big supplier, maybe they can conduct their audit on, they can conduct a third party audit and they can pay them. Another option is that Walmart or the buyer pays for the audit. An advantage if a buyer pays for the audit is that audit is supposed to be, or audit will be, more objective, because if supplier pays for the audit, then there will be a conflict of interest, because auditors, they want their business and they would tend to give favorable reports to supplier if supplier is going to pay them. But if buyer pays for the audit, then audit would be more objective. Another option is that sometime these buyers, they tend to piggyback, which means if a company has been audited by one supplier, then they would say, okay, if you have a report from another supplier, we would accept that. And then supplier certification, these certificates like ISO 9001 and ISO 14001, these are the certifications that are usually accepted by buyers, which mean ISO 9000 would mean that the company has a good quality management system, and ISO 14000 would mean that the company has good environmental management system. So this certification, especially the one that is developed by international organization like ISO, that's International Organization for Standardization. It's an international organization. It's headquartered in Geneva in Switzerland, and they provide these certificates like ISO 9001 and ISO 14001. Then the next thing is supplier relationship management and supplier partnership. In supplier relationship management and partnership, there are two approaches. One approach is American approach and another approach is Japanese approach. Japanese approach is a long-term approach, which means they tend to develop long-term relationship with their suppliers. American approach is, on the other hand, is transactional approach or arm's length approach. A buyer would say, okay, we are just buying something and we are paying you for that. There is no commitment. So if we find your product is good, we'll be buying from you, but we do not commit to buying for you next time also. It depends upon bidding, how competitive you are in bidding. Japanese approach, on the other hand, is totally opposite. They invest in their supplier, and when they invest in supplier, then supplier feels a reciprocal obligation that supplier should respond to the buyer by committing themselves, by investing more in quality management and improving the quality of their supplies. And that could be one reason that why Japanese products are so good in quality, durability, and efficiency. And all these things are related to vendor analysis, supplier audit, and supplier certification. Sometimes buyers also categorize suppliers by using their own system. One thing is that they can have certification. For example, ISO 9001 and ISO 14001 certification is one type. And sometimes buyers also categorize supplier themselves. For example, Walmart categorizes supplier into three or sometimes four categories. If a supplier falls, one category is red category, other is orange category or yellow category, and then red category. So the supplier who are usually good, they will belong to green category. But in between, there can be some supplier who have some non-compliance and some issues. So they will fall in the middle category, where they will be given a warning that they need to improve it, and if they succeed in improving, they will move to green category, which is safe. But if they fail to improve themselves, then they will fall to the lower category, that's red category, and where they may be even blacklisted. This is again how you should what type of a relationship you should have with your supplier, short term, medium term, and long term. And again, it's a compromise, or it's a trade-off between two things, between a cost and quality. As I mentioned earlier, that American approach is to have short-term approach, whereby it's very economic because there is no long-term commitment. Japanese, on the other hand, they have long-term approach, which means they try to develop partnership with suppliers, and they make investment in supplier. In short term, you don't make an investment in supplier, but in long term, you make an investment in supplier, because it's in your own benefit in the long run. And now we move to the last part, the second last part of supply chain, that's logistics, which means that's a movement of materials, services, cash, and information of a supply chain, movement within a facility, and incoming shipments and outgoing shipments. So we know there are two parts of a supply chain. If this is the core company, then this part of supply chain is called as upstream, and this part, which means towards the customer side, that's called as downstream part of supply chain. And here is reverse logistics, which means the movement of goods from customer to the company, or a representative designated by the company. You buy something from Amazon, you don't like it, and you want to return it. Now that would be reverse logistics. In some countries, actually, there are regulations. For example, in Japan, any electronics product, once they expire, and you cannot throw them, they must be recycled by the company, so after their life is over. So which means the company is responsible for collecting items from the customer, and this whole process is called as reverse logistics. And it's not just about expired product, there can be even recalls also. Recalls are frequently issued, sometime about safety of cars, sometime about safety of medicines, and some other product. So all those things would be included in reverse logistics. And two key elements in are gatekeeping and avoiding, which means making sure when a product is coming from customer, making sure it meets your requirements, which means you are not accepting a wrong product, the product that doesn't belong to your company, but it was incorrectly accepted. And then there is avoidance, and which means maintaining a balance between two things. So for example, on the one hand, there may be a tendency that you want to satisfy your customer, and therefore you have these policies that you can accept within 2 months. But in that case, it would put a burden on your supply chain. So supply chain manager would wish you reduce this return period to 3 days, let's say, for example. But you know that a return period of 3 days, it will not be fair to customer. So in any case, you see, if you increase this return period, then there will be more pressure on supply chain. If you reduce this, supply chain managers will be happy, but customers will be dissatisfied. So it's a trade-off, which means making decision so that your customers, they also remain satisfied, and also it does not put much pressure on reverse logistics, on returned items, and therefore your supply chains.